US-backed Syrian forces celebrated in the devastated streets of Raqqa on Tuesday after gaining control of the northern city that once was the heart of the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria's self-styled caliphate, dealing a major defeat to the extremist group that has seen its territory shrink ever smaller since summer. Militants took over the vibrant metropolis on the Euphrates River in 2014, transforming it into the epicenter of their brutal rule, where opponents were beheaded and terror plots hatched. It took thousands of bombs dropped by the US-led coalition and more than 4 months of grueling house-to-house battles for the Syrian Democratic Forces to recapture Raqqa, marking a new chapter in the fight against the group whose once vast territory has been reduced to a handful of towns in Syria and Iraq. Liberating Raqqa is a triumph for humanity, especially women, who suffered the most under ISIS, said Ilham Ahmed, a senior member of the SDF political wing. It is a salvation for the will to live an honorable life. It is a defeat to the forces of darkness, said Ahmed, speaking to the Associated Press from Ain Issa, just north of Raqqa. Fighters from the SDF celebrated by chanting and honking their horns as they spun donuts with their Humvees and armored personnel carriers, and hoisting yellow SDF flags around Naim, or Paradise Square. The infamous square was the site of public beheadings and other killings by the militants. Bodies and severed heads would be displayed there for days, mounted on posts and labeled with their alleged crimes, according to residents who later dubbed it Hell Square. Crumbled and flattened buildings stood behind the fighters as they drove around the square, a sign of the massive destruction the city has suffered since the militants took over. It was in Naim Square that the extremists paraded tanks and military hardware in 2014 in a chilling show of force that foretold what would come. SDF commanders later visited Raqqa Sports Stadium, which ISIS had turned into a notorious prison. Dozens of militants who refused to surrender made their last stand earlier Tuesday holed up inside. "Immortal martyrs," chanted the men and women in SDF uniforms, saluting their comrades who died battling for the city. According to the coalition, about 1,100 SDF forces have been killed fighting ISIS in Raqqa and Deir el-Zur. Military operations in Raqqa have ceased and we are now combing the city for sleeper cells and cleaning it from landmines, Brig Gen. Talal Salo told the AP earlier in the day. A formal declaration that Raqqa has fallen would be made soon, once troops finish their clearing operations, Salo said. Col Ryan Dillon, the Baghdad-based spokesperson for the US-led coalition, was more cautious, saying only that more than 90% of Raqqa had been cleared. He estimated about 100 ISIS militants were still in the city and said he expects the SDF to encounter pockets of resistance during the clearing operations. The Battle of Raqqa has killed more than 1,000 civilians, many of them in coalition airstrikes in recent months, and displaced tens of thousands of people who face the prospect of returning to ruined homes. The coalition and residents who managed to escape accused the militants of using civilians as human shields and tried to stop them from leaving the city.